are the top 20 pitching prospects in Major League Baseball. I actually ranked 40 of these guys in my Substack. I'll link to that in the video description. This goes super in depth, but for this video, I want to stay a little high level, talk about 20 guys, give you like one or two big things about them to help you understand who they are as pitchers, how they project going forward, and as always in these videos, I love doing a call to action, so if you hang around to the middle, you'll find out what that is. Number 20 on this list is Seth Hernandez, the top high school pitcher selected in this most recent draft. I hesitate a bit on high school guys, primarily because the data quality is just not as good. As I was doing prep for my draft coverage on MLB Network, I had Seth Hernandez, so I talked to a variety of people on him, and I was actually surprised a bit to hear how many organizations were kind of considering him, but didn't think their data quality was like absolutely amazing and fantastic. And that gets at the larger point of like, you're not entirely sure what he's going to feature from like a shape standpoint exactly when you bring him into your org until you get him on your tech and hardware, etc. And then you start to see, oh, okay, it's a 16 and 10 fastball, which is kind of like my estimation on him. Pretty two-plane pitch, maybe more like 15 and 9 eventually, as you see up here on the screen. Anyways, aside from that, the two big reasons that he is selected inside the top 10 by the Pirates is number one, he has an aesthetically gorgeous delivery, and I prodded a couple people I was talking to about this because the reality is you hear like clean delivery a ton. We don't entirely know if that correlates to success or health or anything along those lines, but he does one thing that I want to point out. He times his delivery really well. So this is talking about the max rotational velocity of different segments of your body and making sure that it goes from, you know, the ground up, like your pelvis is rotating and hitting that top speed at an interval that is different and earlier than your torso, than your arm, etc. Hernandez is able to create that separation and then time it all into foot plant when his front foot accepts force from the ground, reactive force from the ground, in a way that is really consistent and somewhat of an anomaly for his age and level. That is why he like looks really smooth in his delivery. On top of that, he's got a really good changeup. Now, changeups in high school, man, if you got a good changeup in high school and you're a righty, like you're probably just mowing kids down. There's just not a lot of good changeups from right-handed pitchers. The precedent of righties throwing a large amount of changeups in the majors and being ace level, which, you know, you kind of have to be poking around if you're a top 20 pitching prospect, or at least like a solid number 3 or number 4, something along those lines. I want to see the breaking ball shape. He's kind of throwing like this downerish pitch right now, and I think he also has like a larger shape as well. The Pirates are going to tinker around with this shape. I wonder what it eventually gets to and how effective it is versus righties. That, to me, will give us a much better proxy next spring when we have some data on him as to how good he can be. Liam Doyle is next, another guy from the draft. He was the third college pitcher selected. He's from Tennessee, really animated on the mound. He had some really fun moments in the College World Series. A lot of people kind of bag him because he has like a relievery delivery. I don't totally buy that, given he's always thrown strikes. He has a really strong history of strike throwing. So the starting pitcher projection here is pretty obvious, especially given the Cardinals selected him this high in the draft. So they're in on him. I'm in on him. It's a really good fastball. He averaged, we got him at Palm Beach, so we have some minor league ball action for him. Some of these other college pitchers and high school pitchers I'm talking about, you're kind of guesstimating. With Doyle, we have like a pretty good idea what the fastball is going to look like. He flashed 96.5 on velo, 18 inches of vertical break, 10 inches of arm side movement. Now, this is going to contract when he picks up the major league ball. Maybe it's more like 17 and 9 or 16 and a half and 9, something along those lines. It'll still be very good. He doesn't have like outlier release traits. He's slightly below average on his release height. He kind of rides the ball from like a average-ish to slightly below slot, but he's not like a big extension guy. So he doesn't have the outlier release traits. What he has is a really strong fastball he puts in zone. There's like rough comps here to Payton Tolle in a way, I would say, especially from the standpoint, which I hit on Tolle way down on this list, is the idea that with lefty pitchers, you gotta have a good enough right-handed hitter approach, the handedness you're going to face like 75% of the time in the majors, to succeed. Doyle threw like 65% fastball at Tennessee, and I was actually talking to Tony Vitello, the coach there at the draft, and the reality is he just didn't really need anything else. The fastball blew by hitters because with the college ball, this shape was like 19 and 12, which we're never going to see in the major leagues at 97 miles per hour. So he didn't need the slider, the cutter, the splitter he throws. When he's now in pro ball, it's going to take some time for him to figure out what that secondary approach is to right-handed hitters specifically. My bet is the Cardinals like the splitter here in particular. I'm fascinated to see the usage of that pitch long-term. And then I imagine they're going to play around with the breakers here and get him to something that's good. So, good pitcher, really good fastball, no outlier release traits from the left side, but the key going forward is, again, how does the mix develop versus right-handed hitters? Number 18 is Jaxon Wiggins of the Chicago Cubs. Now, this guy has an electric fastball, staying on the theme here alongside Liam Doyle, who also has a really good fastball. Wiggins is just a righty. It's 98 miles per hour, 17 inches of vertical break, 10 inches of arm side movement. It's a ride-run shape from a really high 6.5 foot release height. He's a big dude, moves down the mound well. He just rips this pitch a ton. The big question here is workload. So he didn't throw basically for 2 months, and he was... At the time, it was like, is he injured? What's going on? Cubs, blah, blah, blah. And then eventually comes out that he basically was just pulled down from a workload perspective. He was a name that was included in a lot of trade discussions from other teams trying to get things from the Cubs. And it seems like the Cubs wanted to hold him partially because this fastball is really, really good. Workload, as I mentioned, is somewhat of an issue. The Cubs also throw a bunch of four-seam fastballs. They think they throw the most in baseball, and they also have the highest pre-two-strike strike rate in baseball. He lines up really well with their philosophies of just like rip a bunch of fastball. But again, to get major league hitters out, he's gonna need more. He's got a slider and his changeup. Both are good. Neither are like great in my opinion. And that is, again, like Doyle, the path forward is like, how does the approach work when you're not able to throw 60-65% four-seam fastball in the majors? Elmer Rodriguez-Cruz of the Yankees is next. He is like your prototypical Yankee pitching prospect. I say that because I'm gonna throw up a pitch plot, and I don't even think you need to know what's going on in this pitch plot. Just look aesthetically like where the shapes are, and you'll see a lot of the time on these Yankee pitching prospects over the last couple of years, they look like Elmer Rodriguez-Cruz. Michael King, I'm talking about Will Warren, Hayden Wesneski, Clark Schmidt to some extent, although he cuts the ball a bit more. The general idea here is like, be somewhat lower slot, cut the ball slightly, allow us to get to two fastball shapes. So you could shoot a four seam and create a seam shifted sinker that creates some drop off your arm angle. You also give you a changeup, and then breaking ball heavy, right, against righties. So these guys generally succeed against righties, and their ultimate upside is somewhat contingent on how they fare versus left-handed hitters overall. The interesting thing about Cruz that I like is that his slot fell. So he was a higher slot guy, and then in 2025, they dropped his slot a bit. This gave him room for the sinker, started throwing more sweeper, etc. So unlike some of these other guys I'm talking about, Will Warren, Michael King, etc., he has exposure to the larger mix. Like, he was already throwing the curveball. He already had the four-seam fastball, where a guy like Will Warren kind of added the four-seam fastball, didn't really throw too much in the minors. Wisniewski, again, similar situation where he just didn't throw multiple fastballs a ton. Cruz has the experience from the higher slot at the other shapes. Then he drops slot, keeps those shapes, not as great, but still has them. And now he's like a six-pitch guy. These guys crush righties, as I said, a little bit contingent on how they fare against lefties, but I think Cruz has some of the mix from a breaking ball feel standpoint to work there. I like him overall. I think he's a higher floor guy. I'm not entirely sure what like the ultimate upside is, but there's something to be said about a guy who can crush righties and have a deep enough mix to give me some confidence that he could get major league lefties out. Number 16 on my list, Parker Messick. Might be a bit surprising because, again, I don't think this is like a crazy high ceiling guy. He's just had success at nearly every level of the minors, and I get the velocity is kind of short, but he's a lefty that can get away with a lot. And the big thing he has to me is what I'll call like the small dude advantage. So he's a little shorter at around 6 foot, and he's got a really high arm angle at 55 degrees. Unlike Rodriguez-Cruz, who dropped his slot from 24 to 25, Messick actually kicked his up about 10 degrees. I think he was around 40, 45, 50 degrees. Now he's up at 55. Decent enough extension as well. The thing I want to point out, when you have a 55 degree arm angle, we expect that release point in space to be about 6.2 feet off the ground. Messick's is around 5.8 because he's smaller. He's a shorter dude. This is the small dude advantage because he has a high slot, but it's from a low release. I think this creates like a visual advantage for him as a pitcher. So I'll say like a lot of lefties, you could try to find the element of deception that works for them. For Messick, I think it's this. And then you layer on top of that, really good command overall. He's got an awesome changeup that's always shown success. He's boring maybe, but this feels like a guy the Guardians will get to like 140, 150 innings a year of like a, high threes, maybe low fours ERA. He'll pop and have some seasons where he's a bit better. If he ever adds velo, that's how you get to the ceiling. But at present, he's a major league starting pitcher, and I just think he's an appropriate top 20 rank. Number 15 on this list is Brody Hopkins. He was the centerpiece of the Randy Arozarena trade between the Mariners and the Rays. He's very unlike other Rays starting pitching prospects in the sense that the Rays and the minors have very consolidated mixes. So a lot of these guys just throw like vert four seams and short sliders. They throw both of them hard. It's not a bad approach. It's just a distinct approach. Hopkins is a guy that's already thrown like 6 pitches. He has insane breaking ball shapes. Like, we're talking about some guys who have good fastballs, the curse of the good fastball where you can't get to the side of the ball and create drop and velocity. Hopkins can absolutely do that. Better than probably anybody on this entire list. His curveball, he's got like this downer curveball, death ball slider thing. I'll call it a curve. 88 miles per hour, -7 inches of vertical break, 4 inches of glove side movement here. So the key thing to think about, if you relate this to other sliders, it's 1.5 miles per hour harder. Usually when you kick up velocity on a slider, what happens is you lose drop, so that vertical break number goes up. With Hopkins, he's 1.5 miles harder than the average slider. And then he has about, I think this is about 10 or 11 inches more drop, which is nutty. There's like no other shapes that comp to this thing. It has insane results. It was running near 50% chase in the minors, 60% ground ball, missing 43% of bats. It's probably the best individual breaking ball on this list. If you think there are other fastballs that are better, like a Payton Tolle pitch or whatever, I'm fine with that. But this is, to me, probably one of the best breaking balls. There's reliever risk here because his strikes aren't insane. He throws hard. He's a wiry guy. It's a deep enough mix to work. If he pops as the starting pitcher, this ranks too low. But because of the embedded reliever risk here, I do think there's some variance in his outcomes. I'm just obsessed with his breaking balls. Troy Melton of the Tigers is number 14 here. So this is the first time we're hitting on what you'd call like a flat approach four-seam fastball. Essentially what we're getting at here is the plane the hitter needs to match the incoming plane of the pitch is just flatter than it is steeper. So this concept of like swinging up on the ball is pretty common among basically every good power hitter in baseball. These flat approach fastballs are harder for like a Riley Green type who tilts a ton and has like a really steep path up to match plane with. So there's a very small point of intersection or overlap of the incoming planes such that you can catch the pitch. Now, does that make you an immediately amazing pitcher? No. And I think Melton does a really good job of, like, Joe Ryan, Brian Wu, Emmett Sheehan have these incredibly flat approach fastballs. These guys have around like -3.7 degrees in terms of their vertical approach angle. Melton is around 4.3, -4.3. The average is around -4.7. So he's in the middle. It's flat enough such that up in the zone, it's hard to get on top of. But because he's not like carrying the ball a ton from that slot, it's just the appropriate amount of carry. He has an interesting mix around it. He's throwing multiple pitches, couple breaking balls here. His slider in particular is probably the one big thing that is really good. It's a short kind of in-between sweeper, around 86, 87 miles per hour. It has shown really strong results at nearly every stop of the minors and in the major leagues as well. The key thing here is probably just to be patient. The Tigers have this pitching chaos concept where they have a lot of these good pitchers that aren't fully stretched into starting pitcher roles, and they use them in like these 2 to 3 inning spurts. Charlie Morin's up after this year. Reese Olson's been injured a lot. Casey Mize is a free agent after next season coming up here, 2026. So maybe we got to wait a little on Melton. But I think eventually when he gets pushed into 6, 7 inning spurts, he's going to be really good. He's a nice blend of floor and upside. Deep mix, flat approach fastball. He's fun. He's probably one of the more like underrated pitchers, I think, on this list that maybe you weren't expecting when you started tuning into this video as I break down pitching prospects. All right, not quite halfway through here, but we're doing the call to action. So if you are a subscriber to the Substack, you probably have all top 40. I'm assuming a lot of you watching are not subscribers, so I hope you find this video valuable to some extent. I know it's not as in-depth as you'll find in the Substack. Again, check that out in the video description if you're interested. But who's the prospect here? As you see in the chapters, all the 20 guys I ranked, who did I miss on? I think the answer most commonly will be Trey Savage. So I'm going to say you can't say him because he's just outside my top 20, and I think I'm the low man on him overall just because I think he's so weird. I don't think it's going to work. Anyways, I don't talk about him in this video. So who's the guy that I missed on? Who's the name that you would have inside your top 20 that I do not have in my top 20? I'll be in the comments. Number 13 on this list is Trey Gibson of the Orioles. Now, if there's a guy in this top 20 I'm talking about that I now, like 3 weeks removed from publishing this list, wish I dropped a little more, I think it's Trey Gibson. I say that partially because when you jump through the minors, we've been talking about how as you get to AAA, there's a different ball and that affects your shapes. And you kind of bake that in to some extent with some of these guys, especially as I talk through a lot of these fastball shapes, and I've hopefully mentioned that they will back up slightly. With Gibson, he lost a lot of spin. He lost like 200 RPMs. And I don't love that because now the fastball is almost around 2,000, and he's going to have to power guys with velo on it. The weird thing is that the fastball spin's kind of low, but the breaker spin is still really solid. At AA, he was up to like 2,800 RPMs. He's got 4 breaking balls. He has like this downer slider, kind of a cutter thing, a sweeper, and a curve. So the reason I liked him from an archetype standpoint is like he is in this mold of let me crush righties, and then I already have a developed enough mix to post some kind of combination of offerings against lefties in the majors that will work and get them out. With the spin backing up on the 4-seam, I just wonder whether the approach long-term is more sinker. And then again, you put a little bit of pressure on the lefty approach to land some of these breaking balls such that you don't have to throw the four-seam fastball a ton, or you have to elevate it a lot. So I maybe regret him slightly. I think if I could redo this, I would drop him to like 21, 2, or 3, and maybe put in a guy like Robbie Snelling or Ryan Sloan. Sloan is just so far off. There's a lot of variance. Snelling, I think, will be up next year, and I like him. I think I underranked him slightly. After I published this list, I had a lot of people say Snelling was really good. But anyways, Trey Gibson, he's interesting. I like him. It's deep mix. It's good. I'm slightly worried by the backup at AAA, and we'll see how it progresses. The Orioles have not had a ton of success developing guys when they get to the majors, but they're kind of loaded in the minors with a variety of these pitching prospects. Gibson, to me, is the number 1 in their org. Number 12 is Brandon Sproat. I'm not going to get into how I tier off these guys. So there are separate tiers here and tier breaks, which create like a cavern between 2 ranks, despite the fact that guys are only separated by 1 spot. And Sproat begins like the 55 future value tier. Anyways, he's a fortitude tester. What I mean by that is that a lot of people liked him into last season, had him as like, one of the better arms in the system. Maybe not number 1. Maybe Tong was number 1. McLean at the time was probably number 3. And then he really took off this year. We'll talk about him in a bit. But you split Sproat's minor league season on June 28th, before and after. Before, he was not particularly good at baseball. After, he was really good at baseball. And a lot of that drives through. He ticked up in velo about 1.5 miles. And eventually now he's in the majors. We've seen him debut. He looks solid. To me, he's a really high floor pitcher. Really strong precedent of innings. Good strike throwing. The mix, again, is deep. He's got a bit of lift on his breaking balls. So we're talking about this approach of like, let me crush righties and figure out the mix eventually to lefties. A lot of guys end up with this. And the Mets seem to be roughly honing on this, where they get guys to multiple fastballs, ride it, sink it, cut it, and then we'll also give you a changeup. Then we'll figure out the breaking ball approach overall. Good spin. Sproat has kind of like lift to his. So I've always comped him to Brandon Pfaadt, but I think Sproat has a better fastball shape such that he won't have to do what Brandon Pfaadt did, which was completely turf the four seam and go to a cutter. But I digress here. Floor over ceiling, really strong mix. I like him from like a long-term standpoint. What the ceiling is here remains interesting. He's an important piece of like a pitching puzzle. That's why I kind of have him at the back end of this tier. I'm very confident he's some kind of major league pitcher and he is some kind of impact, but maybe it's more through 160 innings of like a 3.9, 4.1, as opposed to being like, this guy's got a shot at like a 3.5 over 180, where you start to really get into like, this guy's a top 12 pitcher in baseball. So I like Brandon Sproat, but he was in fact a fortitude tester. If you bailed on him before June 28th, that is not good because he looks completely fine. And at this point, you could throw away April, May, June. Sproat's very good. Number 11, Jarlin Susana, the velocity king. He sits 99.8 miles per hour on his four-seam fastball. Also throws a sinker. I think he played with his changeup this most recent season, and also has a really good slider. Now, he just went down with trap surgery. He's probably out until like May, June of next year, but this all happened after I submitted this list that I made, so I got to keep him at 11. I generally have this philosophy where if the guy's presently injured for more than like a couple months with like some kind of soft tissue or elbow injury, I'm just going to take him off the list and then put him back when I see that everything is reverted and he's healthy. It's just easier. I would do that with Susana. I'd keep him outside the top 20 here. The problem is just, I love velocity. There's a point at which maybe it becomes too much, where we just don't know how to get a guy to hold up throwing 100 miles per hour as a starting pitcher. And it's funny because like sometimes with these guys, the big velocity means you can't really locate, and therefore we just make him a reliever, you know. But with Susana, he can actually strike the ball enough to be a starting pitcher. The problem here is more just, I don't know if he could throw 140 innings sitting 100 miles per hour. Like, maybe that's just too much for one body to handle, or we haven't gotten to the point from a high performance standpoint where we understand how to help a guy, you know, sustain this level of stress on his arm over extended periods of time. I think that it's weird, but he may end up more of a reliever, partially because of the fact that he's just going to be injured a lot. He's going to take another year or two to get to the capacity from a workload standpoint to be able to throw 120 innings. That's going to be 2027 at that point. And that's assuming that he comes back from this trap injury fine and doesn't run into any subsequent elbow injuries because he's throwing this hard. Really tough guy to analyze from like a role projection standpoint. No doubt this stuff is insane. I just struggle to see how it's going to hold up. I'm not entirely sure if that's a justification for dropping him, but the fact that we now have a trap surgery for him, he'd be outside my top 20. He's fun. He's electric. I just wonder if he's more of a closer. Noah Schultz, number 10. We're in the murky area of where I ranked all these guys, and then the more I dig into them, I'm like, man, should I have ranked him there? But Schultz is a guy with pedigree. He's really funky, so he's a really tall dude, and he creates some very odd angles. He's not like a huge extender down the mound. He actually draws some like rough comps to Randy Johnson in that respect. He's not Randy Johnson, but Randy Johnson never really extended down the mound either, and Schultz is comparable in some way. The problem with Schultz is that this year he ran into like a knee issue. I think he had some issues with like his patellar tendon or something along those lines. I think that this affected his ability to block his front leg. So that front leg sticking into the ground, front foot strike, where you send that energy back up to the chain, release the ball, it's really important. That like claw back and the stability of the front leg has a strong correlation back to velocity. I don't think you could just throw away all his result data this year because of this injury and it nagging him, it seems. But I do think I take what he did this year with a grain of salt. Now, he's like a true seam shift guy. So he cuts the ball, and it's not like he's going to end up verting fastballs, and he's not high efficiency. He's more like, I'm going to create a bunch of different shapes. We talk about vertical approach angle. There's also like horizontal approach angle. So how the ball is entering the zone laterally. That is the strength of Schultz, is like let Brian Bannister and the White Sox pitching brass figure out the orientations to get him to in order to seam shift his way towards limiting barrels. I don't think this is a high strikeout rate arm. I think this is like an off-barrel contact neutralizer, but I think it's with a weird enough frame where if you can dream on him progressing a bit, he becomes fascinating as a pitcher. He's a seam shift guy, as I mentioned. Oh, the cutter I wanted to point out too. So he threw this thing, he added it this year, threw it early in the year. And getting to this point about him being a seam shift guy, he stopped throwing this pitch. And it's my understanding that this was because it made him less unique in his approach angle. So how he was getting around his cutter affected his other pitches. So the White Sox are very conscious of how his ball approaches the zone. I don't know if it's like walking a fine line with him, where it's not like he's going to stuff you to death. He's going to like seam shift you to death. And we don't really hear that a lot. So I trust Brian Bannister. I trust some of the people in the White Sox organization from the pitching standpoint, specifically on Noah Schultz. And I'm going to take a rain check, like give me a mulligan on Schultz, where I don't necessarily think this season was representative of what will happen in the future for him. Number 9 is Carlos Lagrange of the Yankees. So this is another big fastball dude. I talk about like the curse of the big fastball, where these guys that could ride and run it at big velo, get behind the ball well, maybe don't have the best ability to get to the side of the ball, create strong breaking ball shapes. I think Lagrange straddles that pretty nicely, where he has like a lift sweeper and a lift slider that he throws. So he's got 2 breaking balls alongside a changeup. And I think the Yankees could push him probably into a sinker, maybe some kind of downer curve to help him over time. But the secondaries, I think, are good enough alongside a really strong fastball that you have a nice amount of upside here. Throwing strikes at most levels he's been at. It's not like plus command, but it's enough to work, I think. He's 98.5 on the fastball, 18.5 inches vertical break, and 10 inches of arm side movement. Again, big ride run pitch. Again, steep release at 6.5. Similar in a way to Jaxon Wiggins of the Cubs, who I mentioned. Lagrange just has a longer track record of innings, and I think the secondaries are better with Lagrange, so that's why he's up this high. Yeah, he's good. I don't really know what else to point out here. Like, it strikes, he's got swing and miss, the fastball's great, the secondaries are good. I think there's more to do from a mixed standpoint. It's really hard to keep him outside like the top 12 or 13, I think, based on the results he has, and the fact that he's sitting 98.5. I think he's got the body to hold up. He's good. He's good. The Yankees, again, really good at pitching development. Number 8, we're back to the 2025 draft here. Kade Anderson, who was selected as the second college pitcher in this most recent draft. And I had a video where I talked about some of these draft guys. So one of the main things I want to point out with Kade Anderson, it's actually related to the Mariners specifically. They are a team that pulled down their slider usage in the minor leagues as an organization more than any other team from 2024 to 2025. To me, this signals like a general philosophical shift. So in the past, they've been a team that hunts low release, sinkers, big sweep. They have the lowest release heights in baseball, lowest four-seam usage in baseball. They're weird, they're wacky, which is odd because their major league pitchers, for the most part, are not that. Like, you think of George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, I guess Luis Castillo, but he wasn't a guy that came up through their org. Even Brian Wu, low release, but like he verts his fastball and figured out a sinker, which has kind of made him unbelievable. Kade Anderson kind of doesn't fit the old Mariners approach of like low slot sweep. He kind of fits this more like, maybe they're kicking into a different sphere of pitchers, and maybe they just got really good value on him because he was expected to go 1 overall, dominated at LSU, strong SEC performance alongside pretty good shapes. He's a lefty. He draws comps to Max Fried. I don't love it, partially because Fried just cuts the heck out of the ball, that he's able to get to all these different breaking ball shapes. Kade Anderson is more like 4 pitches to righties. Again, really focusing on like how are these lefties going to get righty major league hitters out. 4-seam fastball, the changeup is the pitch that I think he will throttle up. And he threw his curveball a lot in the SEC. That's, I think, going to come down in usage. It's a good pitch. It's more of a strike stealer to me. I don't think it's a pitch he's going to like blow by major league righties. And then he's got a decent slider too. So curious to see what the Mariners do from a mixed development standpoint. They have a strong pitching department. I love Ryan Sloan, who's not on this list, but he's another guy who's like just so far away that I wondered what his trajectory is. So I trust him in the hands, Kade Anderson of the Mariners overall. SEC also has some weird data errors that I've run into. Someone from LSU told me that their internal system kind of undershoots release height and extension. So like his release traits were kind of stock from what I saw and pointed out in that old video I did. But I'd actually expect him to be a little more unique, which helps the profile here. So he's number 8. Again, I don't have great data here, so this feels a little bit uncomfortable for me to rank him 8. But I think he's a very good pitcher. Everyone that I've talked to from Major League side, especially some of those teams in the top 10 or 15 that was looking at him, really liked him overall. The Angels just took Tyler Bremner, probably from a slot standpoint. Kade Anderson, is very good. Number 7 on this list is Jonah Tong. I did another video where I broke down Tong, Tolle, and Savage in really deep detail, so I'm not going to dig into like the specifics of what he does. The overarching theme here is that he's a really weird crossfire deception righty. I think deception is generally overused as a way to describe why a right-handed pitcher is successful. It's probably underused as to why a left-handed pitcher is successful, depending on how you define deception. But Tong has righty deception. What I want to focus on is his lack of success in the majors and the small sample we've seen. So the thing here to look, 24 to 25, right? He consolidated his mix. He jumped in velo. He adjusted his changeup such that this year in the minors, what we saw was like 85% four-seam change. And that changeup shape is somewhat platoon neutral. So the Mets seemed comfortable throwing at lefties and righties. He gets up to the majors. The four-seam just doesn't pop as much as it did in the minors from like a zone miss and general swing and miss in the zone standpoint and contact quality, etc. Small sample, sure, but what I think that's exposing is that he needs some kind of breaking ball. We've seen him jump the curveball usage, which was 6% at AAA up to 12 in the majors. So the Mets seem aware of this. I just wonder whether it's an offseason project to figure out what breaking ball shape or pair of breaking ball shapes really work for him to be more confident versus right-handed hitters and maybe figure out another swing miss pitch that you could zone a bit more such that you don't have to rely super heavily on the fastball to left-handed hitters. He's gone through a lot of different variations of this cutter slider thing. He had like a downer shape, classic cutter, then he had like a true cutter for a period of time. He's played around with it. I just think that feels like the natural progression for him. And I'm not panicking at all here. It just seems like he maybe was slightly overexposed in the majors, which maybe at the end of the day helps a guy understand what he needs to do and change, especially heading into a big offseason for him as maybe he wins a rotation spot out of camp next year. The Yankees, Cam Schlittler is number 6. He begins what I'll call the alpha tier. So these are the guys that you project to have some shot at being like a number 1 in a rotation, top 15th pitcher in baseball overall. The floor here is probably something like a 3 at worst. I think all these guys have a case to be number 1. Schlittler's case comes from the fact that he has succeeded in the majors with somewhat of a reduced repertoire with very obvious avenues to expand. What I mean by that is that you go back to last year, he was throwing a changeup. He was throwing a lot more sweeper in the minors than this particular season. As he ascended to AAA, what happened is he basically took this slider shape, which is really strong, similar to that Brody Hopkins angle of like he can create drop at velo. His slider cutter shape's about 5 miles per hour harder than your average slider, and it maintains the same shape as the slider, if not better. That is plus plus. I love that pitch, and yet he's in the majors and he threw a bunch of four-seam fastball, a ton of four-seam fastball to left-handed hitters in particular, and he had success, as I was saying. So you have a consolidated mix on a team that does a really good job adding shapes. Maybe he adds back the changeup this offseason. We've already seen more sinker in September for him versus right-handed hitters specifically, which is going to be a natural, easy shape for him to create some seam shift separation off his four-seam fastball. He had a sweeper in the minors. Maybe they bring that back. There's a lot you can do with him, and he's already been pretty good. Again, it's not like plus command here. I do think he's like a stuff in zone guy, but there is a lot of stuff in zone guys that have become some of the best pitchers in baseball, and I think Schlittler has a chance to do that. Number 5 is Andrew Painter. A lot of people have him number 1. The reason I don't is that the four-seam fastball has kind of gotten beat up at AAA, and I'm slightly concerned about it, I would say, overall. A guy like Cam Schlittler actually comps to him, Painter, relatively well, because they both have this like ability again to throw a pitch hard, throw a slider hard, create drop, and create some lateral break on it. That's really good. I want that thing like 40% of the time to righties. You know, it's a great pitch. Contact quality, can get it in zone. It's going to work. That pitch is going to work. The fastball, though, has gotten beat up, as I said, at AAA to the point where I'm not entirely sure it's great. We're now like 4 years removed from him having like good four-seam fastball results, partially because each of the last 2 seasons we didn't see him pitch. So we're going off kind of like the pedigree nature, him having good breaking ball feel, playing with other shapes. He just adjusted his changeup, it seems, to have more drop, which I like overall. Some people have him number 1. I think I'm okay with that. I wonder if you have him number 1, whether you're holding onto your priors a bit too much. I corrected down. If I could redo this right now, I think I'd correct down even more and have him like 7 or 8. But I know a lot of people like him. I know Eno Sarris's Location Plus model and Pitching Plus model really likes him as well. So the underlying stuff's here. I just wish he had more success. And I think that's understandable. Bubba Chandler, number 4, the guy the Pirates held down in the minors all year for a reason I don't really understand. Actually, I do understand. It's just a service time thing. They want him to potentially, have the extra year of control or win the Rookie of the Year next year and them to get a draft pick. I get it. It's just frustrating because this guy should have been up in the majors and developing. Instead, you delay his development until this season. You use him as a reliever in a couple spots, and now he's a starting pitcher. He got beat up. He had a good start, up and down. It's another big, really good four-seam fastball. He exemplifies the curse of the good fastball to some extent. I've never thought his slider's that good. This thing has had average results pretty much everywhere in the minors. In the majors, it's not really performing that well. His best pitches have always been the four-seam and the changeup. I disagree with most of the grades saying this pitch is like average to above. It's just never shown that. The shape is fine. I just wonder whether it's better for him to split. He kind of throws this curveball, which just mimes the slider shape. I wonder if the Pirates can be progressive enough here, because they've actually done a good job on the pitching development side in the minors, to like push him into more of a cutter and break into a curveball and like separate those shapes. Give me 2 distinct shapes, get him into like a downer slider territory, see if he can hold velo and pick up more drop. He's really good. Like, the fastball is good enough to work here, and it's gotten results in the majors. Like a lot of the other guys on this list, you just got to figure out the rest of the mix. And the reason Chandler's 4 and not like 20 is that he has a really good changeup. So I'm not worried about the lefty approach at all. Just a little bit worried about the slider and wondering what they do from a breaking ball standpoint here and splitting those 2 pitches out. He's 98 miles per hour. It's carry, it's run. He's a guy that like we haven't seen much regression on shape perspective as he's jumped up. So that is good. Like a lot of these other fastballs I'm hitting on at AA, I'm a little concerned contract and aren't like plus. Chandler has a plus fastball. So it's hard not to put him top 5, I think. He's a very good pitcher. He should have the reins kind of pulled off him next year. I'm fascinated to see what he looks like in like 120, 30 inning sample. Number 3 is Nolan McLean of the Mets, who we've seen in the majors already have a bunch of success. This dude is a spin monster. We were talking about Susana being the velo king. McLean is the spin king. Curveball up at 3,200, 3,300 RPM. Number 1 average RPM in baseball among curveballs. His sweeper's around 2,900 to 3,000. Now, spin was a thing that popped up early in StatCast as like, yeah, spin rate. And then I feel like to some extent we kind of forgot about it for a couple years. And it's funny, as I talk to people in baseball, it's something that's brought up a lot, especially with pitching prospects, purely from the standpoint of, okay, perhaps there's some visual advantage that high spin gives you, from like an eye not being able to pick up really rapid spin in shapes, kind of like blurring out the ball. And as to whether guys actually see spin in flight is probably an entirely different video. But the other angle for it that I think a lot of these pitching coordinators and directors of pitching are hitting on is that it just gives you more avenues from a development standpoint. Higher spin pitches move more, and generally, if you could get a guy like McLean who throws them hard, you start to get into the angle of like, okay, we can figure out your mix in a variety of ways if you're struggling to hit a certain spot of the zone or struggling versus a certain type of bat path, such that we'll just give you more pitches. And this has been the MO of the Mets. The Mets do a really good job of this, of splitting up fastball, getting to 3 fastballs, giving you multiple breaking balls. They did this with Clay Holmes, added like 4 pitches year over year on him. And they didn't necessarily do it with McLean, but, well, they did it over time with McLean. But for him, again, he's like the ultimate, most evolved version of this. I will crush righties because my breaking balls are so good, and eventually I'll figure out the lefty mix. The reason he's up this high and he's had success in the majors is that he threw 35% curveball sweeper to lefties at AAA. That's up to like 45% in MLB, and he pulled down the four-seam fastball. So again, multiple pitches versus lefties at velo from an interesting slot. He's a low arm angle guy. There's a little bit of like deception-y, again, deception for righties, I think somewhat underused or overused, and McLean hits it well as Tong, where he's now already iterated on his mix against lefties in the majors to have success versus lefties. So the problem that he had is almost entirely gone, and he has the mix to be able to continually counter hitters. It strikes, it's velo, it's really good shapes. Again, he's got a case to be number 1. I landed on number 3 with him. I think he's a fantastic pitcher. Thomas White of the Marlins is number 2. This is one that I think I'm bringing in a little soft skill stuff. He was a name that was brought up to me not by the Marlins organization as being a guy that people thought was like the best pitching prospect in baseball, which is partially surprising because it's kind of stock lefty traits. The command is good. The velocity is good. The stuff is like good. There's nothing here that's like, oh my God, exceptional, great, like McLean's spin, or you go down like Bubba Chandler's 4-seam fastball shape, Painter, really good slider, Schlittler, awesome breaking ball shapes. White is more like, I have a fun downer sweeper thing that I can throw to righties, and it's not going to create too much of an issue. I generally don't love like big sweeper shapes to opposite-handed hitters as like a primary breaking ball. So they kind of flipped him to like a kick change, really strong offering. They added in a slider, which seems to be more of like a pure strike stealing pitch. I think what people are getting at here is, even though maybe there's some limitations on like the shape optimization standpoint long term, we saw him up at AAA. He didn't regress a ton with the major league ball, so it's a really strong shape. He's really young, so there's perhaps a little bit of velo growth to come. There's feel growth to come, and he has all these levels that he's had a lot of success at overall. So you're mixing a really strong combo of command, velo, decent stuff, results. It's not outlier release traits, as I said. It's the perfect balance of, I think, a lot of things, such that he was brought up surprisingly more than I thought he would be as a guy to be the number one pitching prospect in baseball. And again, not just by the Marlins organization, which obviously loves him overall. So I'm a huge Thomas White fan, perhaps partially influenced by those I spoke with who were super on him. But again, he's got a case to be won. You also could make the case that Bubba and McLean and Schlittler and Painter are better. This top 6 here is somewhat tight in terms of how you rank them. I really don't think there's a ton of separation, which maybe contrasts with other lists I've seen out there. Thomas White's very good. We should see him next year. All right, my last guy, it's Payton Tolle of the Red Sox, number one pitching prospect in all of baseball. My prior video hitting on some of these guys, I teased that he might be like top 5-ish, and I liked him more than Tong, and I got him all the way up to 1. And I will say, I think the fastball's amazing. I get it backed up slightly with the Major League Baseball. He's still going to get really good results on it. The reason I like him is a bit more intangible. Again, when you have this good of stuff in this top 6, separating between guys is maybe more of like an art. And the reason I really like Tolle is that this dude made a dramatic amount of adjustments to his mix in a very short period of time. If there's a way to identify like what feel is for a pitcher, I think it's adding really good pitches that you can throw 4 strikes and get miss on immediately in a short period of time. He flipped to a kick changeup, which immediately was good. It took him a little to figure out the shape, but that's a great pitch. He's able to like actually zone it a bit, which is crazy. He's generating chase on it. They gave him a cutter like a month ago. That's now one of his primary, I think it's his most used non-fastball in the majors. He also added a curveball like 2 months ago. This comes from a guy who was like two-way at TCU, who was basically throwing like 70% fastball because he's like a huge, massive extension. That's probably the one big thing with him. He's just 7.5 feet of extension, which helps everything. But he was just throwing his fastball. He's like Tanner Scott at TCU. And now he's turned into like, not Tarek Skubal, but like some version of a big fastball guy that I think could work long term because of how the other pieces of his mix come together. Again, I want to know how your pitching prospect who's a lefty can attack right-handed hitters and have success against them. And Tolle might just be a little late to figuring that out, but the foundation of what he has from a fastball standpoint, a release trait standpoint, etc., is plus. This is what, to me, a number one pitching prospect in baseball looks like. Woo! That was a super long video here, 40 minutes. I think it's the longest I've ever done, and we did it on pitching prospects. If you made it all the way through, it's a big congratulations, because I imagine a lot of people are jumping in and out. I know I didn't post a video for 2 weeks. The algorithm is not going to like me. I get it. I needed a little reset, had some family in town, took a small vacation, but we're back on track now. I didn't go extinct. I just needed a little reset, as I said here. So we'll have some cool stuff into the postseason, some other higher level stuff into the offseason, repeating some videos from last year, doing some cool stuff. The channel's back on. Make sure you're tuned in, as always, and thank you for watching.